Takuto is a lonely, terminally ill patient with no friends, and his family only cares about the life insurance payout they'll get, so no one ever comes to visit him in his hospital room. His only comfort is the world of Eternal Nations, a civilization-building RPG which he plays all the time because he has nothing better to do. One day, Takuto falls unconscious because of his illness, and the next time he opens his eyes, Takuto finds himself sitting on a stone throne in the middle of a forest, and while he is wondering what's going on, he sees a woman emerge from the forest, calling him her king. This is Atu, Takuto's favorite character in the world of Eternal Nations, but even though he's excited to see her in real life, he doesn't know how he should react. Fortunately, Atu is self-aware of the fact that she was part of a game, and she knows exactly who Takuto is, the legendary player who claimed the top of the user rankings year after year. She remembers every single playthrough she and Takuto have gone through, so she knows him better than anyone, and they are both happy that they finally get to meet in person. Takuto asks Atu if she was the one who summoned him here, but in truth, Atu has no idea what's going on here either. She simply found herself in the middle of this forest all of a sudden, but she is pretty sure that this isn't the afterlife. If she has to guess, she thinks this world is similar to Eternal Nations, but they can't be sure of that yet. Either way, Atu thinks this is a great opportunity, so she asks Takuto if he would like to start over with her and build a kingdom just like old times. Takuto likes the sound of that, so he agrees to work together, and Atu goes through the whole opening sequence, although it's a little embarrassing now that they are actually standing next to each other in person. The first order of business is figuring out where they are, so Takuto uses magic to summon a scout. But now that he is actually seeing the scout up close, he is disgusted by how ugly it looks. There's nothing he can do about that. Their Minara is a civilization that rules over darkness and evil, so his early game strategy is to avoid garnering too much attention so they won't get into any conflict, at least until they are strong enough to defend themselves. That's where this bug comes in, so Takuto orders it to go take a look around the area and notify him of anything important. At first, the bug just stands there and stares at him, but then Atu sternly reminds it that Takuto is its commander, so the bug takes off running to complete its task. Takuto was a little concerned that he might not be able to control his troops in this world, but it looks like everything still works the same as it used to. He can also see what the bug sees to some extent, so he should be able to figure out where they are soon enough. Anyway, moving on, it's time for them to think about their next steps. Takuto started off with 200 mana points, and he had to use 100 mana points to summon the scout, so he only has 100 left. He plans to build a settlement to act as their base of operations, which will cost him an additional 20 mana, but after that, he won't have much mana to work with. He was honestly hoping to create a warrior to fight for them in case they get attacked, but that really isn't an option anymore. Atu assures Takuto that he doesn't have to worry because she will fight for him, but to be honest, that isn't very reassuring coming from her. As part of the hero unit, Atu will grow stronger as more time passes, but right now, she pretty much has the strength of a regular person, so there's not much she can do to help. The bug is still zooming through the forest, and thanks to its scouting, Takuto now has an understanding of what this area looks like. But he's a little surprised because even though this entire area is a forest, he hasn't seen any animals or monsters yet. Atu assumes all the animals must be hiding since forest terrain provides a lot of hiding spots, but Takuto's main concern is that if he doesn't find some animals soon, they'll probably have to spend some mana to get some food. Atu apologizes to Takuto since she feels bad about not being of much use, but he tells her not to worry about it because simply having her by his side is a huge morale booster. Hearing that makes Atu really happy, so she tells Takuto she's very grateful for his kind words, but Takuto is having a hard time getting used to how expressive she is now that she's a real person. Just then, the scout finds something interesting, so it gets Takuto's attention and shows him a dark elf settlement in the middle of the forest. It's not far from Takuto's current location, and it looks like there are a lot of elves gathered together. Atu is relieved that it's just dark elves since they have a tendency to lean towards neutral evil, so they won't be opposed to the Minara Kingdom. But Takuto still thinks this is terrible because he can't have another civilization so close to his. His plan was to avoid war by staying hidden for as long as possible, but that won't be possible with the Dark Elves so close. Atu suggests that the two of them should ditch this place and head to a new location, and Takuto agrees since they haven't actually built anything yet, but before that, he wants to observe the Dark Elves a little more and survey the area to see if there's anything useful nearby. Suddenly, Atu senses someone's presence nearby, so she and Takuto turn around and spot a group of Dark Elves emerging from the forest. The Dark Elves seem just as surprised to see them because they had no idea there were other people in this forest. The Dark Elves only came here because they were driven out of their homeland, and with nowhere else to go, they were forced to head into this accursed forest. The journey has taken a toll on the Dark Elf children, and at this rate, they aren't going to last much longer. A small group of dark elves was sent out to go looking for a food source, and the group leader is certain that there must be something edible around here since there's so much vegetation. But Emil is very nervous. She has heard rumors of a dangerous forest at the edge of Idaragia where an ancient evil was sealed away, and she is worried that they might get attacked. The leader assures her that those rumors are nothing more than superstition, because if there really was an ancient evil lurking in this forest, then the trees here wouldn't be able to grow so well. Although he can't deny that the forest is really creeping him out for some reason. As soon as Gio lays his eyes on the Takuto, his heart sinks because what he sees before him is a manifestation of pure evil and malicious intent. He wants to run away, but he is worried that any hasty actions might put him and his people in danger, so he slowly approaches Takuto's throne and kneels before him to show his respect. He introduces himself as the head warrior of the Mazaram Dark Elf clan, and he apologizes for entering the forest without Takuto's permission. Atu has no idea why the elves are acting so respectfully, but she just goes with it and demands to know why the elves would trespass on Takuto's land. Jia begins explaining how his people used to live in the Central Plains and were a peaceful tribe, but Atu ain't listening to all that, so she tells Jia to keep his story short. Jia apologizes and quickly explains that the elf tribe was persecuted and driven away from their land, forcing them to flee into this forest. He doesn't understand why his people had to suffer such harsh treatment when they never did anything wrong. They always aim for peace, but they were attacked and killed due to the prejudice against their race. Takuto takes one look at Jia and notices that he looks really thin, so Jia explains that he and his people were barely able to escape as their village was destroyed, so they didn't have time to pack supplies. And since they've been on the run non-stop, they haven't had time to look for food. In fact, that's why Jia and his team ventured out on their own since it has been 5 days since any of them have eaten anything, but they haven't had much luck in finding edible plants or animals. Takuto feels bad for them, so he decides to help them out a little and uses some of his mana to create some apples for them. Jia is surprised when he sees apples rolling on the ground because he has never seen anything like it. He's hesitant to try it since he doesn't want to be rude in front of a being like Takuto, but Emil and the others are so hungry that they don't care. They all bite into their apples, and it's the best thing they've tasted in a long time. Takuto even creates some pears so the group will have enough to eat, but Jia is still in shock from Takuto's kindness, and he doesn't know how to react. Fatu yells at him, saying it's rude not to accept the gift that Takuto so graciously provided for them, but Jia isn't hesitating because he is skeptical of the food. He presses his head against the floor and says he really appreciates Takuto's generosity, but there are children of the clan back at camp, and they have grown very weak due to the lack of food. They'll die soon if they don't get something to eat, so Jia asks for permission to take this food back to his clan so he can feed the children. Takuto feels bad for the children who are suffering, so he decides to go the extra mile for them and creates a ton of different food for Jia to take back with him. Although, Atu doesn't approve since something like this will cost a lot of mana. The Dark Elves are all in disbelief at the sight of so much food, and they are even more shocked when Takuto tells them they can have it all. For years, the Dark Elves have been oppressed and forced to live in the shadows, so no one has ever lent them a helping hand like this before. The Dark Elves express their deepest gratitude towards Takuto and carry the food back to the camp. At the camp, the Dark Elves are all on the verge of giving up, but a few of them remain hopeful that Jia and the others will return with some food. Just then, everyone in the village smells something delicious, so they all turn around, and to their delight, they see Jia and the others carrying bags of food on their backs. They are all relieved that they don't have to go hungry anymore, and everyone is praising Jia for finding so much food. But when they ask him where he got it, he just says he got lucky, leaving out the details of his encounter with Takuto. Later that night, Jia is staring at the fire while deep in thought when all of a sudden he is approached by the clan leader Molter. He tells Jia that he did a great job today and that the fruit he found were amazing. But he notices that Jia doesn't seem all that happy about it, so he asks him what's wrong. After a brief silence, Jia explains that he encountered a legendary being deep in the forest and he doesn't know how to feel about it. Molter asks what legend Jia is talking about, so he explains that Emil mentions something about a powerful being that was sealed away in the accursed forest. Molter has heard of the legend before, and he is shocked to learn that Jia actually met the King of Ruin. He explains that according to the legend, when the world becomes too prosperous, the King of Ruin will descend on the land and destroy everything, forcing all civilizations to start over from scratch. In all honesty, Molter can't guarantee that the legend is true, but he is inclined to believe it. He asks Jia if the being he met called himself the King of Ruin, but Jia doesn't remember him saying anything like that. Although how terrifying he looked, a name like the King of Ruin is definitely fitting. Molter asks Jia if he talked to the King of Ruin, but Jia says it wasn't much of a conversation. The King of Ruin didn't say much, but he had a woman serving him who spoke on his behalf. From how Gia has described the encounter, Molter is certain that this being is bad news, so he asks Gia if he had to do something like sell his soul in exchange for the food. Gia explains that the King of Ruin didn't ask for anything in return, but Molter thinks that sounds absurd because what kind of evil being gives things out for free? Gia has no idea why the King of Ruin did it either, but if he had to guess, he would say it was mercy. He assumes that his grace must have sympathized with their predicament and offered aid to save them. Molter is shocked that Gia would call the King of Ruin his grace because that is a title used only to show the utmost respect. But Gia sees nothing wrong with addressing the King of Ruin as his grace because he is someone who deserves respect. Molter can't believe that Gia is actually defending the King of Ruin and asks if he has been hypnotized or something. But Gia points out that the only reason they are even able to waste energy arguing like this is because of the food that they were given by this so-called evil god. And it's not like Gia could have rejected the offer when they were so desperate for food. So what exactly did Molter want him to say? Molter realizes he has no right to judge Gia's decision to trust the King of Ruin, because given the situation, it was the best option. However, as the elder of this tribe, it is his duty to make sure everyone remains safe, so he says from now on, he will handle the negotiations with the King of Ruin. He has been alive for over 200 years, so he's sure he should be able to come to an understanding with the King of Ruin. Meanwhile, back at Takuto's camp, he is currently being scolded by Atu for carelessly wasting his mana on charity. She asks him why he would do something like that, but Takuto just says he felt bad for the elves and he didn't want to let their children starve. Atu understands that, but she reminds Takuto that they have barely started setting up their kingdom, so they can't be wasting their resources like this. She has a point there, so Takuto apologizes for not consulting Atu before using his mana, and he promises to make it up to her. But that aside, there's something that has been bothering him for a while now. He wasn't able to talk to the Dark Elves properly when they showed up because he was so nervous. Atu is surprised to hear that since she had assumed Takuto was playing the role of a disdainful higher being on purpose, but in reality, he's just socially awkward. Just then, the scout bug returns and it informs Takuto that the elves are approaching this area again. Takuto and Atu are surprised that the elves are returning, but he did give them more food than they could carry last time they were here, so he assumes they are coming back for the rest. Having different cultures nearby is bound to cause a conflict at some point, so Takuto really wishes the elves would just take the food and leave already. He could just tell them to get out of the forest, but that would require maintaining a conversation with someone other than Atu, and that's outside Takuto's skill set. Atu can see that Takuto is troubled by this, so she comes up with an idea and suggests that she handle all of the negotiations in Takuto's place. That way, Takuto will come off as a mysterious and dignified king instead of a socially awkward teenager. He likes the sound of that idea, but he asks if it's really okay for him to make her do all the talking. However, Atu said she's always happy to be of assistance, so she has no problem being Takuto's voice. A little while later, Molter and Gia arrive and kneel before Takuto. First, Molter introduces himself as the chief of the Dark Elf tribe, and he wants to offer his deepest gratitude to Takuto for providing his tribe with the food they desperately needed. He asks to know the name of their benefactor so he can properly thank him, and after a brief pause to confirm with Takuto, Atu announces that they are in the presence of the King of Ruin, Takuto Aira. Gia is stunned upon realizing that Takuto is indeed the fabled King of Ruin, but they can't be rude to him. So Molter once again thanks Takuto for his kindness towards them. Takuto is relieved that the negotiations have gone well so far, and since there's no conflict with the elves, Atu tells them to just take the food and get out of here. Both Gia and Molter are stunned when they hear this because they were totally expecting to have to pay some high price for receiving aid from the King of Ruin, so they ask Atu if it's really alright for them to leave without offering anything in return. But Atu reminds them they have nothing of value to offer in the first place. Molter really doesn't want to live the debt unpaid, since with someone as great as the King of Ruin it might end up costing their souls, but he can't say that out loud. Takuto can tell that things have gotten tense all of a sudden, so he calls Atu over for a sidebar. Atu is really upset with how stubborn Molter is being, and she is sure that the elves will end up causing trouble for them if they are left alone. So she suggests that they should just kill all of them and move on, but Takuto was actually hoping to build a mutually beneficial relationship with them. He figured out that Molter is uneasy about simply receiving aid for free, especially when it's coming from someone called the King of Ruin, so he suggests they should ask for some reasonable compensation to calm his nerves. Atu thinks it's a good idea, so she relays Takuto's decision to the elves, and Molter looks relieved, but Atu is still trying to figure out what to demand as compensation. She turns to Takuto for help, so he tells her to ask about the outside world. So Atu tells Molter that as compensation, he must provide Takuto with information about the world outside this forest, and he says he would be more than happy to oblige. However, Atu tells him that once he is done providing said information, he and his people are to leave this forest immediately. But that would mean the elves would be forced to wander without a home again. He asks Takuto to allow them to stay in the forest, but Atu immediately denies his request, and she tells him that if he values his life, then he had better not tell anyone of Takuto's presence. Jia is about to protest because the Dark Elf tribe won't survive if they are forced to leave the forest, but Molter stops him because they can't risk upsetting Takuto. They both get up and begin walking away, but as they are leaving, Takuto wonders to himself if this is really alright, because he doesn't want to force the elves to suffer, and just then, he comes up with a great idea. He calls out to the two of them and asks them if they want to become his citizens, but they are so stunned by the proposal that they don't know how to respond. Even Atu can't believe what Takuto just said, so she calls for another sidebar and asks why he would say something like that. Takuto explains that he was thinking of recruiting the Dark Elves with a refugee system, and now that he mentions it, Atu realizes it's not a bad option. Dark Elves aren't inherently good or evil, so they won't have any major conflicts with Takuto's evil-aligned kingdom. Plus, in the game, the main citizens of Reinara were homunculi, and here they are ugly as hell, so he asks Atu if she really want to live in a kingdom that only had those things around. Atu is now on board, so she turns to Moltar and Jia and tells them that if they agree to become citizens of Manara, then they will be protected. Moltar asks what exactly that means for them, and to put it bluntly, Atu tells them that from the moment the Dark Elves join Minara, they will be considered evil. Whether they choose to join Minara or not is entirely their decision to make, but she assures them that if they do join, it will at least be interesting. A while later, Takuto and Atu are walking over to the Dark Elf camp since they finally made their decision, but Atu is a little upset that it took them so long to agree. Takuto, on the other hand, expected them to take a while to decide, especially after Atu told them they become evil if they join Minara. Eventually, they arrive at the Dark Elf camp, and upon his arrival, Molter announces to everyone that their new king has arrived, so they all now down and clear a path for Takuto as he walks toward the throne they made for him. Some of the elves are terrified when they see Takuto for the first time, while others seem excited, but those who got a little too close end up passing out from the sheer magnitude of the dark energy coming off him. Jia warns everyone not to look directly at Takuto because he might think they are being rude, but Takuto doesn't really mind. Once Takuto is seated on the throne and all the Dark Elves have been gathered, he officially declares that everyone present here will be a citizen of Minara from today onwards. That's pretty much it, so all the Dark Elves are now Takuto's citizens, but Jia was honestly expecting more since Atu did say they would become evil. Just then, an immense amount of hatred begins flowing into Jia's body as he recalls all the injustices he and his people have suffered, and it's the same for all the other members of the Dark Elf tribe. And after being reminded of how they've been persecuted, they are all relieved and excited to have someone like Takuto looking after them. A few days go by in the new kingdom of Minara, but things are not going well for Takuto at all. He was just taking a look at the map that Molter gave him, and he becomes incredibly frustrated because this is the worst RNG he has ever gotten for his starting location. Atu asks him what's wrong, so he points to the map and explains that to the north of this forest, there's the holy kingdom of Quolia, which worships the god Arlos, and the elven kingdom of El Na, which worships nature, and both of them lean heavily into the good alignment, so if either one ever found out of the evil nation of Minara, then Takuto and Atu would be toast. There's no way they could ever defeat powerful nations like that in a head-on confrontation, and to make matters worse, this accursed forest doesn't have a single harvestable resource, so the difficulty here is just unfair. On the bright side, they do have the Dark Elves now, so they should be able to make up for the current weaknesses of the kingdom, and speaking of the elves, Atu hears them approaching and she seems pleased because they are probably here to deliver some valuable information. A little while later, Molter and Jia arrive, and this time they brought Emil with them. Jia explains that Emil is very smart, and she is well versed in lore and foreign affairs, so he is sure that she will be of great help with Takuto's plans. Takuto is pleased with the extra help, but he can tell that they are all still really nervous around him, so he has Atu tell them there's no need to be so formal around him. Moving on, Atu informs them that Takuto has made a few decisions regarding the administration of Minara, so starting today he will be appointing Moltar and Jia to key positions. Molter will handle the management of the nation's matters, and from what Atu has heard, Molter should be able to use magic, so she is expecting a lot from him. As for Jia, he will be appointed as the warrior captain for the entirety of the Minara army, and he will have full authority over the troops. Jia says he is honored, and he promises to slaughter any and all who stand in Takuto's way without a second thought. Takuto is weirded out by how serious Jia looked while he said that, so he has Atu tell everyone that he prefers peace, so they should avoid starting conflicts unless absolutely necessary. Gia can't believe the King of Ruin is actually a pacifist, but anyway, Atu tells everyone to get some rest for now because they will soon begin constructing houses in the forest. Molter thanks Atu for her consideration, and he tries to make himself look better by telling her that the knowledge he possesses will make him far more useful than a brute like Gia. But Gia starts arguing that an old man like Molter won't be able to help much with construction anyway. Atu isn't really interested in their argument, but it seems like they are eager to start working, so she asks Takuto if it's alright for her to order them to begin the construction immediately. Takuto sees no problem with that, so he says they can start collecting materials, but he also wants to do it in a way so they can gather the materials without destroying the forest. Atu thinks it's a great idea, so he asks Molter if it's possible, and he says they should be able to pull it off if they make most of the houses out of the hollows of giant trees. Takuto is pleased to hear that, so he tells them to get to work as soon as they can, but he reminds them to reforest as they go. The three of them are about to get to work, but they are a little confused because they don't understand what Takuto meant by reforest. Takuto is surprised that they don't know what reforesting is since, from what he has heard, the people of this world should have already unlocked the fortified architecture tech tree. Atu asks them if they at least know about military magic or the 6 great elements, but Molter has only ever heard of 4 great elements. As for military magic, Emil doubts that anyone from the other nations would know about it. So Takuto and Atu realize that the people of this world are surprisingly underdeveloped. As it stands, the magitech of the Dark Elves is far below Takuto's expectations, but if the rest of the world is similar in terms of development, then Takuto thinks they should be able to catch up to them soon. But that will be a lot later in the future, so for now, Atu explains what reforestation is. It is basically just replanting trees as you cut them down to maintain the forest, but normally trees would take decades to grow naturally, so in this case, reforestation refers to a special technique that uses magical elements to accelerate growth. She says it is a technique that was personally created by Takuto, but that's a big lie because Takuto didn't invent anything, but it would be awkward to tell the truth now. Emil is really excited by the idea that Takuto possesses incredible knowledge, so she asks if he was the one who created the apples and grapes that he gave them. She even planted some of the grape seeds and they've already begun to sprout, so she can't wait to see how well they grow. Takuto and Atu both go silent as soon as Emil mentions that she planted a grape seed because the thought hadn't even crossed their minds. Fruit like grapes and apples don't exist in this world, yet Takuto was able to create them using his emergency production skill, and if his hypothesis is right, and the skill shouldn't be limited to just food. Takuto tested out by summoning a coin, and just as he expected, it worked flawlessly. With this new discovery, as long as he has the mana for it, he can create anything from gunpowder to base metals and even petroleum. So taking over the world may not be as hard as he thought it would be. The Holy Empire has caught wind of a dark presence in the forest, so the Holy Saint, along with the bishop and a few knights, are sent out to investigate. The knights have all heard stories about the saint possessing special powers, but from what they've seen so far, she just looks like an ordinary girl. However, when they encounter a group of goblins, she demonstrates why she is so well respected within the church. Under the god Halos, evil creatures like goblins are seen as a scourge to be eliminated, so with one wave of her staff, she burns them all to ash in a blaze of holy flames. All the knights are stunned by what they just witnessed, so the cardinal explains that Solina's ability is part of the reason the empire has been able to maintain its peace with the elves and push back all the evil in Idorragia, which is why she is revered as one of the 7 great saints of the continent. Solina asks the cardinal if he has gotten any updates on the omen she sensed in the accursed lands, but the cardinal tells her that he can't simply send paladins to investigate that region. In their nation, showing any interest in the south is ludicrous, so there's no way the central church would permit the use of paladins to investigate without a good reason. Solina tells the cardinal that if he isn't willing to send any paladins, then she will go investigate it on her own, but the cardinal tells her she can't do that either because as a saint, anything she does will affect the church's reputation. He can see that Solina isn't willing to back down on this, so he tells her that he will send some of his personal troops to investigate, but as he is leaving, he curses Solina under his breath for being so difficult. Meanwhile, in Minara, all the Dark Elves have been working hard on the construction efforts, and they finally completed the throne room. Takuto is very happy since he doesn't have to sleep out in the open anymore, and his nation is one step closer to world domination. Just then, Takuto's administrators show up because they have a domestic affairs meeting scheduled for today, and they've got good news for Takuto because they finished designing the new set of clothes he asked for. This makes Takuto even happier because he was getting sick of wearing his pajamas constantly. Atu and the others are glad that Takuto likes the new clothes so much, but they've got pressing matters to attend to, so it's time for them to begin their meeting. However, Takuto seems a little distracted admiring his new fit, so Atu suggests they should just start the meeting without him. First off, Molter asks Atu what buildings they should start constructing since aside from the throne room, they haven't actually made much yet. They've already done preparatory work like leveling the ground and pruning the nearby branches, so Atu tells them they should start with a food production facility since keeping all their people fed is a top priority. Molter asks why they would need to worry about food when Takuto can produce it with his power, but Atu tells him they can't continue relying on Takuto to make food for them because what would they do if he wasn't around? Molter admits that she's right, so Atu says they need to get to work right away and pulls out this thing. Molter is horrified by what he's looking at, so he asks Atu what it is, and she tells him it's a flesh tree. That doesn't sound good, but the explanation is even worse because it's a special kind of tree that grows mysterious meat which tastes like human flesh. Atu says it's the first step in their food production plan, but Molter, Gia, and Emil all agree that most people won't want to eat something that tastes like human flesh, so Atu promises that they'll get other food sources eventually. For now, they'll need somewhere to store the tree's flesh, so Emil says she can work on building a storage house for it, and as if the flesh tree wasn't already disturbing enough. It also talks for some reason. The next thing on their agenda is research, because they need to acquire the latest technology if they want to advance quickly. Molter asks her what kind of technology they should prioritize, and Atu tells him magic technology is the way to go. Specifically, military magic. Normal magic allows a person to attack a dozen or so opponents at once, something that Molter is already capable of, but military magic on the other hand allows you to attack thousands at once and even change the terrain to give yourself an advantage. Molter is amazed to learn that such magic exists, and he is excited to learn as much about it as he can, so he says he will handle the research personally. Now all that's left is the military planning, and Gia immediately offers to start mobilizing an army, but Takuto stops him and says he doesn't actually want to put much effort into their army yet. Armies don't produce anything, they just consume resources, and right now, Mainara doesn't have enough resources to sustain an army. Besides, even if they did create an army, they are nowhere near strong enough to actually defeat anyone, so it would be pointless. Gia protests because as things stand, they won't be able to protect Takuto if he were to be attacked. And to make matters worse, Molter and Gia actually have bounties on their heads for being the leaders of the Dark Elf tribe, so they might get hunted down at some point. With things as they are, Takuto agrees that neglecting defense would be a bad idea, but he still doesn't want to spend all that money on making an army, so he says he will make a hero instead. Atu tells him that's a great idea because while a hero has a high production cost, it is a lot easier to provide for a single person as opposed to a whole army. Molter and Gia are confused, so they ask Atu what she means by a hero, so she explains that there are several heroes in Mainara who serve under the king. They are all powerful with special abilities, but they are also a bit crazy, so dealing with them can be annoying at times. There are several conditions that need to be met in order to summon a hero, but it should be possible to summon one soon with how much they've progressed. And as an added bonus, summoning a hero won't draw too much attention to them, so Mainara can continue to remain hidden. That pretty much settles all the concerns for domestic affairs for now. The happiness of the people of Mainara is very important to Takuto, because the happier they are, the more mana he is able to generate. Meanwhile, over in the Empire, the junior paladin Lonius is busy praying in the cathedral when the high paladin, Veldis, comes over to talk to him. Lonius asks Veldis to quiet down since this is a place of prayer, but Veldis just wanted to have a friendly chat with him since they were both assigned to the investigation. It's about time for them to get going, so Lonius gets up and Veldis notices that he's wearing his wedding ring as a good luck charm, so he must have a family waiting for him at home. Veldis asks Lonius what his family is like, so Lonius tells him he has a wife named Marcia and a daughter named Mina, but his personal life isn't important to their mission, so he doesn't plan to talk about it much. Lonius has heard rumors about Veldis being crude and ill-mannered, and the rumors were pretty accurate, but overall, Veldis doesn't seem like a bad guy and his skills are no joke, so he is a respectable paladin. Veldis begins complaining about getting assigned to a pointless mission like this, but Lonius reminds him that this mission is to investigate one of St. Solina's revelations, so they need to take it seriously. Still, Veldis thinks it's weird that they were given such a lackluster team even though it's for a saint's revelation. Veldis and Lonius are literally the only paladins on the team, and the rest of the people are all mercenaries who are hired to fill in the gaps. The odds are looking great for them, especially since it's a mission to the southern forest, but Veldis just wants to get it over with so he can get home as soon as possible. Meanwhile, back in Mainara, construction has been going very well so far. This place is finally starting to look like a proper civilization, and the Dark Elves don't seem bothered by the flesh trees anymore. Takuto is really excited because seeing all this in person is a whole new experience compared to what he used to see when he played the game. Emil shows Takuto around and points to the residential area with mostly treetop houses. Since she's been focused on food production, she hasn't had much time to work on the homes. However, the flesh trees are growing in nicely, so the food storehouse should be complete soon. Meanwhile, Molter has been working on his magical research over at the Magic Institute he created, and most of the citizens who are talented in magic have joined in on his research. In addition, they also discovered a spring nearby, so they now have a secured water source, and finally, this building is the public office where the administrative meetings in Minara will be held. She would have liked to make the building a little fancier, but this is the best she could do with her current resources. Takuto is pleased with the initiative Emil is showing since she's handling things really well, and he is also glad to see that the Dark Elves who were on the brink of death when he first met them are now looking lively. Emil is a little nervous since she can't tell what Takuto is thinking, so she asks him if he is pleased with her work so far, and Takuto tells her she has done a great job. He says he is glad to have her as one of his citizens, and hearing such high praise from Takuto is the best thing Emil could have asked for, and she's so happy that she breaks down in tears. Once she regains her composure, Emil shows Takuto the flesh tree farm, and things have been progressing smoothly thanks to all the farming equipment Takuto provided them with. Although, Emil is still freaked out by the weird talking flesh trees, so she wants to move on to the water source she found. She leads Takuto and Atu out into the forest, but for some reason, things look a lot different from what they were before, and when they finally arrive at the spring, Emil is horrified to see that the water has turned completely black. Molter and Gia soon show up as well since they had heard that Emil wanted to build an aqueduct near the spring, but now that it looks like this, they don't think they can use it anymore. However, just when they had lost hope, Atu tells them that the water is still perfectly safe, and to prove it, she bends down and takes a sip from the water. The others are shocked that Atu would take such a risk, but she tells them to try taking a deep breath, and when they do, for some reason, the air feels better than normal. This is one of the benefits of the evil nation of Minara, because all land near the nation becomes cursed terrain, and it grants minor buffs to evil creatures, while applying penalties to neutral and good creatures. That means while the water, air, and land might look dark and deadly, all the evil citizens of Minara will not suffer any negative effects from it. There's just one minor problem with it though. A cursed forest is pretty noticeable, so it kind of ruins the whole strategy of staying hidden. It won't be that bad if the cursed region remains small, but as Minara expands, it will become easier for their enemies to discover them, so Gia and Molter think it's time to start working on that army Gia mentioned before. However, Atu tells him there's no need to worry since a single hero is more than enough to handle any early game threats. Molter and Gia still aren't exactly sure what a hero is supposed to be able to do. Atu could give a long-winded stat explanation, but she thinks it will be quicker to just give them a demonstration. Tentacles begin to emerge from Atu's back, and she uses them to slice down all the trees around her in an instant. Molter and the others are in utter disbelief at what they've just seen, but Atu explains that she is also a hero, and since she has been here for a while, her strength is finally coming back to her. Although it's still nowhere near what it was in her prime. The important takeaway here is that heroes are incredibly strong, and they grow stronger with the passage of time, so as long as they don't face any significant threats for a while, Takuto is confident that they should be alright. But that aside, he's a little upset at Atu because she didn't need to destroy those trees just to prove her strength. Molter and Gia are still in awe of the power that Takuto possesses, and they are eager to build a palace befitting his majesty, but Takuto thinks that would be a waste of resources, so he tells them he doesn't need one. Molter, Gia, and Emil insist that it is absolutely necessary for Takuto to have a castle because they would feel too guilty as his citizens if he didn't, and since they are making such a big deal about it, Atu tells Takuto that he should probably just have one made to satisfy their wishes. Takuto admits that a palace would be cool, and he was hoping to make a floating castle someday anyway, so he might as well get started on it since things are going so smoothly. But unbeknownst to him, the paladins are slowly making their way towards the Dark Continent, and there's bound to be a confrontation when they discover Minara. Along the way, Veldas tells Lonius that he did a great job hiring this many mercenaries, and Lonius says it wasn't easy to pull off, especially since most of the mercenaries in the area are currently stationed up in the north. For some reason, a group of barbarians suddenly appeared in the northern province, and they'd begun raiding nearby villages, so the Saint and her army were sent to deal with them. However, the situation up there is still really bad, so one of the mercenaries says they are glad they aren't the ones who have to fight the barbarians. Another mercenary says it might actually be worth it since he heard that the pay up there is really good. But there are also rumors of a witch being seen up there, and none of them want to deal with that. Veldas tells them there's no point in talking about it now since whether the witch in the north is real or not, there's no way they'll run into her since they are heading for the southern accursed lands. The group soon arrives at a nearby town to spend the night, and while they are all having dinner, Lonius begins asking the mercenary Bargo for more details regarding the witch he talked about earlier. Bargo says it's just a rumor he heard saying that a witch was responsible for all the chaos in the north, but Lonius thinks that's preposterous since there's no way a single person could have done all that, especially when the saint was dispatched to deal with the matter. Bargo agrees that it sounds far-fetched and he personally doesn't believe it is true, but better safe than sorry since facing a real witch would be incredibly dangerous. Speaking of danger, Bargo thinks it's strange that the kingdom dispatched 2 holy knights on such short notice, especially when their destination is the accursed lands, so he asks Veldis to tell him what exactly they are going there to deal with, because if it's something similar to a witch, then Bargo is backing out right here. Veldis didn't really get any details about what they would encounter in the forest, but he assures Bargo that it can't be that bad. If he had to guess, he would say it has something to do with the dark elves that flood into the forest recently, so the kingdom probably wants them to make sure the elves aren't causing any trouble. He's wrong that Lonius and Bargo fully believe him since dark elves are seen as dangerous assassins and curse users to the people of the kingdom. Lonius is concerned that if the dark elves are left alone, they might eventually grow strong enough to attack the kingdom, so he wants to commit some light genocide, but Veldis cuts him off and says this mission is just to investigate, so the second things get dangerous or violent, they are going to retreat. Bargo is glad to hear that Veldis is so sensible since he really doesn't want to be part of a mass killing, but Lonius doesn't understand why Veldis would turn down an opportunity to wipe out an evil race. Veldis simply says, "Ma'am, you've got a wife and kids and you really want to go into a genocidal battle for no reason." Even if Lonius doesn't care about making it home alive, the rest of the mercenaries here have families they would like to see again, so unless absolutely necessary, Veldis isn't going to put their lives in danger. Lonius still doesn't agree with the idea of letting the elves live, but he also wants to see his family again, so he decides to follow Veldis' instructions after all. Meanwhile, over in Minara, Takuto has summoned all his citizens to one place because there's something he wants them to witness. They're all really confused since he's just standing there next to a pile of the meat tree fruit, but then Takuto raises his hand and begins pouring mana into the fruit. Everyone eagerly watches to see what will happen, but to their surprise, right before their eyes, the pile of fruit transforms into a scout bug. Everyone is amazed by what they've just seen because Takuto basically created new life with the wave of a hand, and A2 announces that this is just a fraction of what Takuto can really do, so they should all continue devoting themselves to him. Afterwards, Takuto heads back to his throne room, and he is relieved that the people didn't ask him too many questions about the scout bug creation, because he honestly doesn't understand how it works. He and A2 just follow the procedure from the game to make it happen, but when you're looking at it in person, it's hard to believe that simply pumping mana into a pile of fruit would be enough to create life. Anyway, now that they have confirmed that they can safely create soldiers, A2 says they can move on to the next phase of the plan, creating a hero. It's going to take a while since Takuto is going to need to stockpile his mana to complete the ritual, but once it's done, they'll be practically unstoppable. A2 is still really excited about it, so she asks Takuto which hero he plans to summon first, and Takuto says he's going to go with Isla, the queen of insects, since she has the most early game benefits. Isla is able to boost the power of all the insect-type soldiers nearby, so with her around, all the scout bugs will become extremely effective fighters. Additionally, Isla can produce larva soldiers to help in combat as well as construction, so she'd be perfect for increasing the development of Minara. A2 praises Takuto for coming up with such a solid strategy, but aside from Isla's unique capabilities, she's also the only hero who doesn't have a problematic personality. As for the other heroes, one is obsessed with conquering the world, while the other wants to watch it all burn to the ground, and Takuto really didn't want to have to deal with that right now. With that said, those two are still really powerful, so he is going to have to summon them eventually. He just hopes that the heroes don't cause any problems when he summons them because he would like to live a peaceful life in this world. Meanwhile, back with the Holy Knights and mercenaries, they have just run into an angry hill giant and dealing with it won't be easy, so Lonius tells all the mercenaries to get ready for battle. However, before any fighting could begin, Veldis tells everyone to stand down and let him handle it on his own. Lonius tries to object, but Veldis tells him it will be quicker if he handles it on his own, and they don't have much time to waste here to begin with. Veldis walks up to the giant and begins saying a prayer, so Lonius explains to the mercenaries that Veldis is using the secret technique of Quolio, which allows one to use prayers to imbue their attacks with divine power. The giant attempts to strike Veldis with its club, but Veldis is easily able to slice the club in half. The power that divine arts will grant varies from knight to knight, but for high-ranking holy knights like Veldis, his power is equal to that of a lesser dragon, so the giant doesn't stand a chance. After Veldis has slain the giant, Lonius begins praising him for his immense power and says that with Veldis and their team, they can definitely handle anything they encounter in the dark forest. However, Veldis doesn't look pleased and tells him that they can't be sure of anything yet. Back in Minara, Takuto is busy munching down on a burger. But Atu is a little concerned because he has been eating nothing but junk food ever since he got here. She doesn't plan to stop him, tells him he should be eating healthier. But Takuno spent his last life in the hospital eating nothing but nutritional slop till he died. So now he just wants to eat some tasty food. Just then, he remembers that he has something important he wanted to discuss. So he asks Atu if she can summon Jia and Molter for a meeting after this. Atu agrees to do so, but she's curious as to what this meeting is about, so Takuto explains that thanks to the additional scout bug he got, he can now see more of the forest, so he wants to ask Jia and Molter for advice on how they should handle it. Atu asks Takuto if he is referring to the village outside the forest, and he confirms it. His main worry is that because the village is so close, they are bound to find out about the existence of Manara sooner or later. Fortunately, it doesn't look like the village is part of the Holy Kingdom of Qualia, so they are likely neutral, and that means it will be possible to negotiate with them. However, if anyone else were to show up, it would be really bad since coming all the way out here would mean they came on a mission. Takuto tells Atu that there's no need for her to worry so much since there's no evidence that anyone has found out about their existence yet. Atu jokingly warns him that saying stuff like that never ends well for the main character, and Takuto is laughing along with her. But he suddenly stops laughing when he realizes that people actually did show up. And even worse, it looks like a group of armed soldiers, so they definitely aren't here for peaceful discussions. Takuto wants to avoid standing out too much, so he asks Atu to go deal with the soldiers. He also asks her to try being peaceful first, but if that doesn't work, then she's free to use as much violence as necessary. Meanwhile, outside the forest, the Holy Expedition is getting ready to enter the forest, but before they could walk in, Veldis notices something off behind the tree line, so he tells everyone to stand back. A few moments later, Atu emerges from the forest wearing a cloak, and both Veldis and Lonius are surprised to see someone living in there. Veldis asks her to identify herself, so Atu lies and says she is a humble dark elf who is living in these woods alongside her people. Lonius still has dark elf genocide on his mind, so he is about to provoke her, but Veldis stops him and changes the topic. He tells Atu that he and his party are just here to investigate the forest, so he asks her if she would be willing to let them in. Atu politely declines their request, saying that the Dark Elves would rather not have their new home invaded for no reason. Lonius feels offended that a lowly Dark Elf would dare to decline a request from holy men of God, but before he can say anything more, Veldis tells him to shut his damn mouth before he causes trouble. Veldis is already suspicious, but he tries to convince Atu to let them in by telling her about the divine revelation they got from the saint about a great calamity in this forest. Lonius starts freaking out because divine revelations are national secrets, yet Veldis just revealed it to a random woman. Veldis once again tells him to shut up, but informing others of a divine revelation without permission is against the Holy Order's rules, so Lonius says he's going to tattle on him once they get back to Qualia. Veldis tells Lonius he is free to do as he pleases, and then he turns back to Atu to ask her if she's willing to let them in now. However, Atu still refuses, and she tells Veldis that there's no need for them to search the forest, because there's nothing dangerous or evil in there. That is a straight-up lie, but Veldis decides it's not worth arguing over it here, so he tells everyone that they are going home. Veldis isn't an idiot. He knows Atu is shady AF, but he also knows that when a single cloaked person confidently comes out to confront an entire army, you're probably better off not messing with them. The safest option here is to return and regroup before making any moves, but Lonius is too impulsive to understand that this is a tactical retreat, so he accuses Veldis of abandoning the mission and says he is stripping him of all authority. He then commands the mercenaries to follow him because they are going into the forest to investigate, and unfortunately, Lonius was the one who hired them, so they have to listen to his orders. Personally, I'm quitting on the spot after seeing Veldis so freaked out, but Lonius orders the men to seize Atu immediately for disobeying his orders earlier, so the men start closing in on her, and despite Veldis' warnings, they are no longer willing to listen. Atu is disappointed that her attempt to get them to leave peacefully failed even though she tried so hard, but well, is what it is. In the next moment, Lonius wakes up on the ground and finds himself covered in blood because Atu has stopped holding back. And while he is somehow still alive, the rest of the mercenaries were not so lucky. Veldis yells for someone to go report this to the kingdom, but Bargo tells him all their messengers were already taken out by Atu, and the mercenaries that managed to survive aren't fast enough to make the trip in time, especially not with Atu in attack mode. He tells everyone to get their weapons ready because now they have no choice but to fight. He orders them all to unload everything that got on her, so the mercenaries fire all their arrows, but Atu effortlessly blocks them all, so she remains unharmed. The last thing Veldis wanted was to have to face someone like Atu, and Atu is just as disappointed as he is. She makes it very clear that this is all Lonius's fault because she would have been perfectly happy to let them leave if they had just agreed to leave the forest alone, but Lonius had to act all righteous, so now she has to kill him. Lonius realizes he messed up badly, so he's finally willing to listen and asks Veldis if he knows what a toot is. Veldis had his suspicions when they first encountered her, which is why he wanted to leave without a fight, but now that he has seen her true form, he is certain that a toot must be a witch. A witch is a Calamity-class monster that is officially recognized as a national threat. A toot is way too strong for the mercenaries to stand a chance against her, so Veldis tells them to stand back so he and Lonius can handle her. They both charge at Atu and recite their prayers to boost their attacks, and at first, Atu didn't think they took them seriously, so she just blocks their strikes and calls them weak. But to her surprise, they actually managed to cut through 2 of her tentacles, so this may not be as easy as she thought it would be. She figures out that their holy magic attacks grant them bonus damage against her, and Veldis assumes that once they've cut all of Atu's tentacles, she will be completely helpless. Atu doesn't want that to happen, so she takes 2 of the mercenaries hostage and decides to use them as meat shields to force Veldis and Lonius to stop attacking. However, Veldis tells Lonius that if they don't stop Atu here, then it is entirely possible that she may target Qualia in the future, so for the good of their nation, sacrifices need to be made. Lonius doesn't like it, but he agrees with Veldis, so the 2 of them continue their charge and cut through the hostages, along with Atu's last 2 tentacles. Atu is surprised that they were willing to kill their allies so easily, and for a second, she looks like she might actually be in trouble, but this was all just a game to her. A second later, several tentacles emerge from the ground, and Veldis is impaled several times. With his final breath, he tells Lonius to run away, and shortly after, Atu finishes him off with a tentacle to the head. Lonius can't believe what just happened because he was sure they had cut off all of Atu's tentacles, but while that may be true, Atu doesn't recall ever saying she couldn't just grow more. In fact, she could summon as many as she wanted this entire time, so she has just been toying with them from the beginning. After what they just witnessed, all the mercenaries have lost the will to fight, and Atu doesn't look like she's in the mood to spare any of their lives, so Lonius tells them all to run away as fast as they can, hoping that if they all scatter in different directions, then at least one of them will be able to make it back to the kingdom and tell them what happened here. All the mercenaries immediately drop their weapons to start running away, and Atu doesn't really feel like chasing them down, so she just lets them go. Although she wishes they had just done that from the start since it would have saved her a lot of trouble. Lonius decided to stay behind to keep Atu busy, so he swings his holy sword at her. But to his utter shock and dismay, she blocks it with the same holy sword technique. He doesn't understand how an evil creature like her could possibly have access to holy techniques, and normally it wouldn't be possible. But when Atu killed Veldis over there, she absorbed all his experience and sword techniques, so now she is just as skilled as he was. She starts attacking Lonius with Veldis' techniques, and she can't help but praise Veldis because he was truly a man worthy of being called elite, but unfortunately, he ended up dying because Lonius couldn't keep his damn mouth shut. She then taunts Lonius by asking him if he even considered whether he'd make it back home to his wife and daughter, but Lonius never mentioned that here, and that's when it dawns on him that Atu didn't just take Veldis' skills, she also took all his memories too. And if Atu is truly capable of doing something like that, then that means she will only continue to grow stronger the more she kills. She asks Lonius if he wants to know the final thoughts that went through Veldis' head before she killed him, and like the kind man he was, Veldis was thinking about the survival of his men right up until the moment he died, but the same can't be said for Lonius. He tries to defend himself and says the rest of the mercenaries have already fled to report what happened, so the mission wasn't a total failure. But Atu simply tells him that all those mercenaries are dead. She said she didn't want to personally go after them, but that doesn't mean she's just going to let them leave, and she also never said she was alone either. She had already instructed the Dark Elves to make sure no one would leave this alive, so the second the mercenaries fled, they were hunted down and killed. Lonius falls into despair at the realization that he is the last one left, so he takes a desperate swing at Atu's head, and she is loving every bit of his suffering. It doesn't take long before Atu has subdued Lonius, but before killing him, she decides to rub salt in his wounds by telling him exactly how things would have gone if he had listened to Veldis. They would have all returned home safely. Lonius would have gotten to see his wife and daughter again, and they would have spent the rest of their lives blissfully unaware of the existence of any calamities in the forest. However, Lonius chose to do something different, so now she's going to kill him, then she will kill his family too, just because. Atu could read his mind to find out exactly what his family looks like and where they live, and she says she's totally petty enough to do it. In fact, she might as well kill all the people in the villages that Lonius passed through on his way here as well, and as they are all suffering the most agonizing deaths possible, she will make sure to let them know that this was all caused by Paladin Lonius. Lonius screams out and begs Atu not to do it, but she is starting to get bored with tormenting him, so she eventually stops taunting him and just ends his life to shut him up. Once Lonius is dead, Gia approaches Atu to inform her that he and his men have successfully killed all the mercenaries who ran away, so no one will be reporting any of today's events. Atu thanks him for his good work and asks him to take care of disposing of the bodies as well, but before she leaves, Gia says there's something he wants to ask her. He wants to know if she really plans on following through with her plan to kill Lonius's family and everyone he has ever spoken to, but she says she was just saying all that stuff to scare Lonius, so she doesn't actually plan on committing genocide. Besides, that would be a lot of work, and she doesn't like getting into fights unless she has to. That aside, she can't afford to waste much time chatting here because she has something she needs to talk to Takuto about immediately. Before the fight began, Atu heard Valdez call her a witch even though she's classed as a hero, and he also mentioned something about a witch up in the north, but Takuto has never heard of a witch class in the game before, so Atu believes this world must be different from the one they are used to. Takuto already had a feeling that might be the case, so while most of the game's features still work the same, it would be best if they assumed the underlying mechanisms are entirely different. Fortunately, the difference doesn't seem to be entirely negative since Atu's ability to absorb skills from the people she kills was improved. Now she can obtain a portion of that person's memories as well, and thanks to that, they were able to gather a lot of information regarding Quelia's current situation from the investigation squad that was sent here. Thankfully, the city of Quelia seems preoccupied with the northern disturbance, so they won't be able to turn their full attention to Minagra anytime soon. Although the fact that the investigation squad was wiped out is sure to draw suspicion, so Quelia is bound to take some sort of action to find out what happened. Takuto is aware of that, but Quelia still doesn't know anything about Minagra yet, so as long as the people in charge aren't complete idiots, they aren't going to attack right away. Right now, Takuto is much more concerned about that northern disturbance and the witch that is causing it. Atu tried digging up as much information on witches as possible from Valdez's memories, but he didn't know much about them to begin with. However, his memories were very clear about one thing. The witch in the north was able to cause military-scale damage to the Qualian army on her own, and her name is Arikino. Meanwhile, up in the Northern Territory, Arikino has just destroyed another village and she is getting ready to move on to the next one. So she brings all the villagers she killed back to life as her undead servants. Takuto has no idea what Arikino's abilities are, but the fact that she is capable of such destruction despite only recently showing up leads him to believe that she might have come here from another world just like him and Atu. If that's true, then things are going to get a lot more complicated, so Atu asks him what they should do. Judging by the destruction that Arikino caused, she is most likely evil-aligned, so it's possible that they might be able to get along with her. She asks Takuto if they should try making contact, but he doesn't think that's a good idea since they have no idea what her personality is like. Atu is disappointed that all this trouble had to start when things were finally going well here, but Takuto reminds her that Arikino is all the way up in the north, so she's not going to be their problem to deal with anytime soon. However, all these new threats have made it clear that Minagra needs a stronger line of defense, so Takuto plans to create another hero as soon as possible. He was initially going to choose Isla, but with all the recent developments, he might need to go with something more combat-oriented. Additionally, he is going to have to reevaluate his strategy of staying hidden. Because of uncertainties like the witch at play, he's going to need to form an alliance with a nation. Obviously, Qualia isn't an option after what Atu did to their paladins, but the nation to the east of the forest should be a good match since they are neutral and they haven't had any contact with Minagra yet. So once the palace here is complete, Takuto plans to go investigate that country, and while he's there, he will find out whether it'd be possible for them to work together. Meanwhile, over in the city to the east, they are currently under attack from the barbarians, so their staff bearer uses a bolt of lightning to wipe them out. All the citizens begin praising her for protecting the city so easily, but she tells them it's too early to celebrate because it looks like they have a lot of work left to do. Back in Minagra, Atu and Takuto are done talking, so she's about to leave, but before she does, she has something she needs to apologize for. She knows Takuto doesn't like unnecessary violence, but she got a little carried away while she was dealing with a paladin. But Takuto just stares at her blankly and asks why he would care about that. Atu is instantly reminded that while Takuto may be kind, he is also the embodiment of evil, so there's not much that would bother him. This was the end of episode 5. Subscribe to not miss the next part.